Hi, I'm Carl Randolph, founding artistic director for Transformation Theater. I'm thrilled that you're joining us for this discussion on queer women of color and their unique challenges and discriminations. A few things before we get started. I'm happy to announce our next virtual reading of You Were Mine by Rachel Lynett and directed by Lorraine Robinson, Tuesday, March 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Watch for the link coming soon on our website and Facebook. For the sake of time, we will not be taking questions during the conversation. You may, however, post comments in the chat section. And now I'm excited to introduce our moderator. She is an actor, director, playwright, and arts educator who is currently working as a professor of theater at Shepherd University in West Virginia and a professor of literature at Southern New Hampshire University. Renee L. Charlow.
Thank you, Carl. It's a pleasure to be a part of this discussion. And now I'd like to introduce our panelist, playwright, director, and theater educator, Rachel Lynett. Freelance director, dramaturg, and secretary of the board for Transformation Theater, Lorraine Robinson. Professor, director, arts educator, Shanea N. Taylor. Director of the Black Theater Collective and Dance Collective, and associate professor of theater at Wayne State University in Detroit, Billicia, Charnelle, Hines. And last, but certainly not least, assistant professor of theater and coordinator of theater studies at Columbia University in Chicago, Dr. Khalid Yaya Long. Thank you all for joining me, panel. It's an honor to share this virtual space with you this evening. So let's jump right into this important discussion. And my first question is for our playwright. Rachel, who is the primary audience for your play?
That's such an interesting question. So for my play, You Were Mine, for all of my plays as a playwright, I kind of divide in my head who I think will see the play versus who I am writing the play for. Because I think that like the game that I'm playing right now for who knows how much longer is I write a play and you just send it out and you hope for the best. And right now, I was about to say, unfortunately, however you may feel about this right now, primarily white institutions are who are doing my plays.
Right.
And so I have to recognize that they also have primarily white audiences.
Mm-hmm.
So for who my play is for, I'm writing it knowing that it's going to be seen by a primarily white audience, but my work is always going to be for people that live intersectionally, right. For people of color, for queer people of color, for people who are even intersectional in their race and ethnicity, because I'm all of those things as well. And I think that somehow balancing both of those in my work to where I tell the truth about my communities, knowing that it's high voyeurism for usually middle-class white people is a struggle I constantly kind of live with.
Okay. So what's the intention of the work?
For the play, I really wanted to show, I hear something I used to hear a lot, I don't hear as much anymore, thank God, is like, oh, they're like a straight couple. And it's like, I never want to hear that ever again. And so when I wrote You Were Mine, I kind of wanted to show that like conversations that you have in relationships, you have in those relationships, regardless, there's some conversations that you just have regardless of gender, sexuality, monogamy. Like there's just certain conversations that carry through because that's what connects us as humans when humans relate to each other. Mm-hmm. And then there are other conversations that obviously you don't have, but that doesn't make anyone less human.
Right.
And so I kind of wanted to write this play to show, this might sound like this, I don't know, not to me, but to someone who doesn't have this life, like this extraordinary circumstance. But really, it's just two people trying to bury somebody they love. And I think that's something that we all can relate to.
Most definitely. So that brings us to this age-old question. Exactly what is LGBTQ plus theater. And who is it for? Dr. Long, if you could start that conversation.
Yes, thank you all. I don't know what happened. I had a glitch a second ago, but I'm back and I'm here.
Yeah.
So LGBTQ theater, a flat definition, I think, is that, or a direct definition is that it is theater that aims to center the history, the experiences, or the lived realities of LGBTQ identified people. But I think and that's sort of like a clear definition, right? But I think it's important to recognize that while it is a burgeoning, genre today, or flourishing genre today, it's not a new area that explored by playwrights. So, in other words, whether it be plays that center the LGBTQ experience or stories, or whether it be playwrights who are not necessarily LGBTQ identified, writing characters, or at the very least including snippets of a story or experiences that are LGBTQ identified, it's important to note that the LGBTQ presence is not new to theater, right? And I don't want to take up too much time, but I just want to mention really quickly that I think it's also, I want to stick on the Q for a quick second, like the Q in LGBTQ, and for me, that's queer. I know that some folks use it they use it to identify questioning, but I'm using it in the context of queer, which for me is this umbrella term that I often use. So for instance, when people ask me about my identity, I often say I am a queer identified Black man, right? Or I'm a queer Black man. And I think about queer in the sense that it goes beyond, identifying same-sex or same gender loving or gender fluid people. But it now, it has come to mean a political or cultural reclamation, right? With the aim of questioning, interrogating, or simply just a radical defiance of normal or normative ideas about life, love, existence, and humanity in general. And in short, queer resists stabilization, it contests universalization, and it subverts normalizations, right? And so when we think about that, it doesn't, in the context of theater, we think about people like Angelina Webb Grimke, we think about Lorraine Hansberry, Alice Dunbar Nelson, Shirley Holmes.
Right.
I want to give a shout out to Shirley Holmes, who I love dearly, and I don't think gets enough play for being a pioneering, queer playwright.
Right.
Pomo Afro Homo, Christina Anderson, E. Patrick Johnson. And then we can even go international and think about, Mariam Bazid, Santiago Loza, or Amal Khoury, right. And if you want to bring in the white, and I'm naming Black people, right? But if you want to bring in, some white identified folks, you got Terrence McNally, Mark Crowley, Tennessee Williams, Lillian Hellman, folks who are doing this work to sort of, shift, challenge, and change, who theater is for and why we do theater and whose stories get to be told. And I know I'm taking a lot of time, so I'm going to stop there, but yeah.
Oh, take your time. Shanea, I saw you agreeing with everything that Dr. Long was saying. Go on and piggyback. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I really like the attention to the Q, right? And the Q being this umbrella, that's kind of a catch-all. And, I know that we'll get into this theme and topic a little bit more later, but I think that umbrella is the most important as we're having this conversation about Blackness and about LGBTQ, because I think that a lot of people have the LGB, right? And so the T and the Q specifically for our community, I think is that which needs a little bit more exploration, and that what we need to dig into. I think for our white counterparts, that's been a conversation a little bit longer. For their communities than it has for ours. And so I think only in the last 10, 20 years, we've only begun to scratch the surface of what covers that Q and how many of us actually flourish and live under that Q and really working to define what that means. And some of that is even outside of the L, the G, and the B. Right. Which I think that this play also brilliantly highlights.
Right. It does. So now, what are some of the purposes that LGBTQ plus theater should be serving? Is it just for LGBTQ plus individuals? Who is it for? Dr. Long, I'll start with you on that one.
I mean, it's for well, first and foremost, it should be for everybody. It is for everybody. Now, here's the deal, right? Now, you have some playwrights who say, my work is for Black audiences. I write for Black people. I think about Pearl Clegg, and I love how she says, look, I write for Black women, and I write for Black women in Atlanta. And so I write in a particular style, in a particular way, and I use a particular aesthetic so that they can enter the discussion and the conversation and see themselves represented on the stage. And you have a lot of playwrights who, write and create works or devise works. I also want to bring in, devise types of performances, right? Outside of the conventional script. Who say, I'm creating works for a particular audience, and that's fine. And if anyone else comes into the room and learns something or gain something, that's wonderful as well. But I think that for me, it should be for everybody, and it is for everybody. And again, if we go back to my first point, that historically queer theater has always been around. You just got to find elements of where it has popped up. You have to sometimes know the coded language where it has shown up, right? But more emphatically, I think we need more. I am celebrating the fact that we have this burgeoning queer representation in American theater and global theater. And at the same time, it is not the sole, I would argue, and I know some people disagree, it's not the sole responsibility of queer playwrights or queer identified playwrights to write stories about queer people, or at the very least, develop 3D characters, queer identified characters. And so I would argue that we need to see more queer representation in everybody's works, because and that doesn't mean you need to start writing queer stories, particularly if you are unaware of the depth and breadth of those stories and those experiences more in particular. But to have a queer character in your current and contemporary world, or even a play that deals with historic moments or a particular time period that's outside of our purview of today, I think that should be celebrated, and I welcome that. Yeah.
It should be celebrated. Now, guys, I come from my primary focus is Black theater. W.E.B. Du Bois said that Black theater should be by us, for us, near us, and about us. August Wilson doubled down on that and said, Black theater exists, it's just not funded. Are the same things true about LGBTQ plus theater? And if they are true, why is this the case?
Absolutely. I think so. That question actually puts me in mind of the African proverb about the old man and his grandson, right? So the grandson goes to his grandfather and he says, "Hey, grandfather, is it true that the lion is the king of the jungle?" The grandfather, of course, says, "Yes, it is true that the lion is the king of the jungle." And the little boy then questions and says, "Well, if that is true, then how come I read so many stories about the hunter defeating the lion?" Right? And the grandfather then comes back and returns and says that it will always be that way until the lion tells its story.
Okay.
Right. And so it is very important that we tell our stories, right? Because of this intersection that we have of queerness and Blackness, and it's so complex. We've got various gender expressions and sexual identifiers and communities, that take shape in so many different spaces and places. It's imperative that we tell our own stories from our mouths, right, in order to eliminate and bring to light some of the misnomers and misconceptions that are made. Again, it circles back to that cue, right? The catch-all, the idiosyncratic relationships and sexualities that exist within our communities. And then also, doubling back on the conversation of who it's for, it's important that we tell a whole story. It's important that we have a whole conversation, even in the light of the things that we don't necessarily want to hear, but that's where conversation and communication begins. we need the courage and the permission and the legacy of our ancestors, right? Our Black queer youth need that. They need people to look back on and to be inspired by. They need that representation and that visibility from our lips. The white media landscape is full and has been addressing white gay men, right, in these stories and these musicals and all of that. And that was the answer to diversifying the theater. Right, but that still leaves us out. And I honestly still think that we have a ways to go because we're still only telling a portion of those stories. And until more of us put pen to paper, like Rachel, those stories are going to continue to be not told. Right, and so the hunter will always win, and that puts us at risk of being eliminated, right? Of not seeing ourselves represented, of always hiding in the shadows. So yes, it should be for us, by us, and near us, so that we can continue these legacies, so that we can continue to be at our full, right?
And to tell our stories.
Right. Once we know where they're going, unless we know where we've been.
That's it. That's very true. Billicia, let's go to just basics now. We're going to step away from theater and we're just going to go to basics because we're family and we're having a round table about the Black queer experience. Is there enough information out there about enough factual information out there about LGBTQ plus people, specifically Black and brown people and their experiences?
Oh, of course not. First, there's not enough in just as a whole with everybody, but then really with Black and brown is hardly any. It's, you find a piece here, you find a piece there, and it's really hard to find the research, to find scholarly work, to find the plays, to find productions of it. So it makes it hard. Some of those challenges is because of homophobia within the Black and brown communities, and sexism, hypermasculinity, all those things. And this, I could go on and on, like how this is connected all the way back to slavery, on how like things have been screwed up with our ideology, because indigenous people have more than two genders. And so this was something that was done during this was done because of white supremacy in being able to mix everything up. And so now when things are thrown back in, Black people are like, no, that's not right. It's only supposed to be one man, one woman, but actually that really wasn't the case. That was something that was thrown upon us. And so also with the Black church, even though there's a lot of gay people in the church, but it's just like it's seen but not not heard. You don't say anything. We know it's there and we know the people who are, but you just don't supposed to say anything, and that keeps your voice down. And with all the different movements that have gone on, it's been just like within civil rights movement, within the Black community, that like there was a lot of men were saying, okay, Black women, you fight for the Black community, fight for the Black men, but you be quiet about women. Same thing within the LGBTQ plus community, that it's like, and especially if you are depending on not even just depending on the gender, just whatever, it's like all these steps going down and down and down further until you feel like you are totally silenced. So it's hard to have that voice, and when you don't have your community behind you, it's hard to speak out, because then you don't want to be ostracized. You're already ostracized within America because of your skin. You're gonna be ostracized by your own community. So then where do you go? And so that just makes it totally hard. And many Black scholars have said the stereotype that I've heard, because I'm from the South and whatnot, and some folks have said, not saying this is all Black men who said this, because probably heterosexual Black women have said it too, but I was told growing up that in Africa there weren't any gay people. And I was like, okay, I didn't think much about it, but I was like, but I started thinking about that later. I was like, wait a minute, how can, that don't make any sense. And so when you're told that, then that shuts it down where you're thinking that I better not speak up, or they're gonna say I'm doing something right. And so then that gets complicated. So it's all these confusing things that interact that you don't want to, if you are a Black performer, do you really want to perform in an LGBTQ plus play and then have your mama see it, who is the deaconess of the church, and your dad is the pastor, and they're like, hey, come and see me, and then you kissing. So, it's like, whoa. So it gets kind of hard. People want to be a part of a community, and when you're not, then you don't, your voice is silenced.
Go ahead and jump in, Shanea.
Yeah, please jump in.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, to piggyback off of that, one of the issues as well is access, right? Especially for our younger people.
Yeah.
What do we have access to in regard to education and information? Because we always talk about, the scholar. Right. But if you don't have information of that, you don't have any representation or anything mirroring that, right, then where do we get this, our information? Where do I find people who look like me? So then the matter also becomes socioeconomic, which is also our problem, our issue as a Black community, but then it just gets doubled down when you're also gay. Yeah. I had a high school counselor tell me that, that's not what we do. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, and that was in the 90s, and again, we're just now seeing representation 10 years ago.
Yes.
Right. Representation that wasn't referred to, by our families or the old folks as funny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or sweet.
Or sweet.
Sweet.
Right.
What, light in the loafers? Yeah, I heard that one.
Or got a dirty shirt.
Yeah. Rachel, go ahead.
I also wanted to just kind of add to the education of also just funding. I think something that is a huge issue is where's the money? I think that theater especially operates on a scarcity model where there's only so much to go around. And you see a lot of like PWIs, like primarily white institutions, getting all of the money, and then the same Black organizations are fighting over crumbs. And so that's also part of the problem too, is that the lump that people of color are all fighting over is already a reduced lump than everybody else. And then when you add queerness on top of that, it's just like, well, how are we ever supposed to find a space and create that community? Because community sometimes needs to be created if we can't even get the funding, because the access we're not given the same access at all.
And Lorraine, I know you can speak a lot to the funding aspect of theater as an arts administrator. Why are we constantly fighting for crumbs?
Well, it's part of the design and the pipeline of money to existing theater systems is in place, and those same PWI institutions are then also able to appeal for funds when it's diversity time, project time, February. And our other institutions, and there's much discussion going on about this right now across the country during this pandemic time, while most producing is paused. About the lack of access to money for individuals that have been doing diverse work, underrepresented voices for decades, and yet have not had the same dollars allotted, and so and it starts off with relationships, and so when there is a lack of diversity in again in the funding system, in theater companies, etc., from the board level on down, it's a question of access. And then it goes back to the earlier question of where do we go? Where do artists of color go? Where do queer artists go to produce their work? And I think that quote you're bringing up earlier of August Wilson and others about work would work by us, for us, near us. I'm having those thoughts myself as well, and that's part of the reason why I've joined Transformation Theater, which is a young startup company,
Right.
because there comes a point where you need to start producing the work yourself,
Yes.
because the support is not there. I have established and run my own theater company previously. And I've worked with larger PWI organizations, and I've worked with community organizations, and there's just such a lack. So, there comes time to, you know, put your own work on, and just even if it's starting with a very small budget, but that work is important, and opening a place and venue and space, opening a space for that to happen it's essential, and basically what happens is you just have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
The bottom line.
You have to do it yourself. So we're all family, and I want to hone in on this question again. What are some of the misnomers or misconceptions about LGBTQ plus individuals of color? Think about it for a moment, because I would like a response from everyone. We'll start with you, Dr. Long. What are some of the misnomers and misconceptions?
I mean, that's actually it's a loaded question. And
I know.
It's a heavy question, and
I know.
I'm thinking about that one. I think my immediate response is that I want to answer it this way. Queer people are people. They're human beings with with subjective experiences, with agency, and they're and I know this sounds cliche, right? But they're no different than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want anything special. We want, we use the term equality. We want equity.
Mm-hmm.
We want access. And in many cases, we actually just want to be left alone, right? In certain cases, my own life experiences, right? Sometimes it's really about just being like, give me access to resources so that I can create the safe space that I desire, and within that safe space, I can then create and develop boundaries so that I'm safe, loved, and protected, right? But I also think that is something that all folks deserve. And I also want to acknowledge, this is not something that we brought up earlier, but I want to acknowledge that, in thinking about queer people and queer experiences, but more emphatically, queer rights, particularly as it relates to Black folks, developed. And in other words, I want to acknowledge Black women, and in particular, Black queer feminists,
right.
Black feminists, who really were at the forefront of pushing the boundaries for all those things I just named.
Right.
And more emphatically, gave us the language to express, whether that be within our plays or within our activism, in our classrooms or in our homes, with our children, right? Like, I want to acknowledge that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Billicia, same question.
I think it's like with the same idea with thinking that, like not all Black people are the same.
Right.
Not all Black queer people are the same. Everybody's different. And so there's no one type of, queer person. We're all different. One person may be, a certain personality or has a certain way about things, and another person may have another certain way about things. And so there is these stereotypes that that queer people don't settle down, or that they are always sex driven, kind of, and because it deals with sexuality, that that there's sex, those are stereotypes. Everybody's different. Everybody, all these queer people here on this panel are all different people. we're all different and we go about things in a different way, and all those different ways should be celebrated. So
Most definitely. Most definitely. Shanea?
I agree. I think that it's the exploration and the understanding of what it means to be of what it means to be queer. I think also, the idea of masculinity and femininity in the solid way that we look at it as a community, and it not being this fluid, this fluid thing, this fluid identity. And especially throughout and within relationships. And then, this idea that that sexuality it can be bred from a place of privilege, right? That we don't have, for lack of better terms, gay people in the hood, right? That we are trying to emulate, the white people, right?
Yeah.
But really taking and embracing, in this new way with new eyes, the spectrum of sexuality, and identity. I think most of us grew up with, boys don't cry, be the man of the house. This is the role of the female. You're nice looking, strong, strapping man with a beard, and the women want you, but why don't you want them? This idea also of where that even expands into the idea of polyamory, right? And some of these, and again, I could go on about this for the longest about where ideas of monogamy and how relationships are created come from, but really looking at the spectrum, right, of where we land with sexuality and identity.
Yeah, one of the comments that I'm often hearing about queer people of color, well, something must have gone wrong in their background and they must have suffered some trauma, and especially about queer women. Well, she just hadn't had the right man yet. Well, she just hasn't had the right relationship with the right man. She just needs a man. I mean,
you saying it in a clean way.
I am, because we're in mixed company.
Yeah.
And I need this job. So I'm just clean way. But yes, those are some of the misnomers. I have a family member, she's passed on now, and she has a son, and he's a queer man. And as a child, that was very obvious. And she was determined to beat the queer out of him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And anytime he did anything that she thought was queer or feminine, that was a spanking, which is another conversation for another time. But yeah, right. She was going to beat the queer out of him. And needless to say, it didn't work.
The thing about that is, like, what we don't realize is how violent we can be. Right? Like how violent we can be. I mean, physical violence, verbal violence, but just, or traumatic and or triggering, right? Yeah. And Shanea mentioned this earlier, around the idea of femininity, masculinity, right? Even those very Western ideas of identity, and how they're also just violent, right? It's, the way in which we attempt to put people in these categories or label them and put them into these really rigid boxes of being, which is why I like queer, because queer says, let's destroy this box, right? Or let's keep the box and let all this shit spill out. But I think for me, like, hearing that story, like, that was not my experience, but I've also had, but my experience was verbal violence, even in the mirror of someone asking me, oh, well, did someone touch you when you were little? Is that why you are the way you are? Right? Just pure violence. And like the way I am in today is, like, in my classroom, I will spend as much time as I need to with folks to get them to understand. With people who are really clear and very genuine and say, I want to learn more, please tell me, please teach me, please, help me, guide me. Yes. But when folks come and they immediately give you this violent response, or this kind of resistance to what it is that you're attempting to share with them and open up and bring them in so that they can sort of change their hearts, as I like to call it. I'm at a place now in 2021, in the year of our Lord and Savior Lizzo. I don't create space for it anymore. I just don't create space for it anymore. Yeah.
Our Lord and Savior Lizzo. I'm going to leave that right there. Rachel, you had a comment?
Sorry.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that I want to make sure that as we have this conversation, we kind of started to do it in the conversation. I want to make sure we keep doing it, is to recognize that the problems of queer people of color, though we all exist under the umbrella, are radically different for people who are trans. Trans women of color, specifically Black trans women, have I don't want to say a much worse time, but have a lot of issues that need to be at the forefront of these conversations and have not been historically. And we need to push them forward because that is who the violence is just going to constantly. And we need to make sure to always say that, like, yes, we're all dealing with these issues, but we need to be protecting our Black and brown trans women, especially. Because regardless of what we're all dealing with, they're dying and they're being murdered. And we need to always make sure we say it and do what we can to protect them.
And we say their names and hold them up. Why is this the case though? Why are Black trans women targeted that way?
So I'm hesitating to say this because I don't want to make an excuse for anyone. But I saw a post on the Book of Faces not too long ago about how we should forgive our parents because they were doing the best that they could, right? And so there's no excuses being made for anyone. But however, if we look back over, our history, our identities and our pasts have been stolen from us and then refed to us in the way that, society wanted us to see ourselves, right? So as we are starting to try to figure out who we are, claim our own identities, we've got these other identities that are coming forward as well. And so I think that it's, again, just starting with that communication and that understanding, the education, the acknowledgement, the representation, because we've heard a lot of the stories about queer people who've come before us, but they're always spoken in hushed terms. Right, or in hushed voices, right? We know about African societies where women came together to want to run a household, right, in a very relationship type of way. But we don't think about that, and we don't tell those stories because I think that we're still trying to gain our own footing for our own pasts and identities. And so it's just really the unraveling of this very messy ball that has been given to us, right? And so how do we then pour into those who are coming after us or those who are still with us, fighting that fight? How do we claim who we are and also at the same time not only find our footing within our own community, but also find our footing within this overarching white community that we're all a part of as well?
That's a good question, which is a good starting place for my next big question. According to the Global Citizen website, there are 9 issues that the LGBTQ plus community is still fighting, and they are violence, parenting conversion therapy, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, bathroom, schools, and other public accommodations, unequal health care, criminal justice, and acceptance. And I ran parenting and conversion therapy together. So those were violence, parenting, and then another one was conversion therapy. Employment discrimination, housing discrimination, bathrooms, schools, and other public accommodations, unequal health care, criminal justice, and just plain acceptance. Now, are these issues doubly true for Black and brown people?
Absolutely. Again, to piggyback on what Dr. Long said, needing the access to resources, and that safe place or space. For our parents to be able to have that access and that resource as well, because yes, while there is, the violence and some of the trauma and the abuse that is created from in our own families, I think that there's still, part of that parental place of it'll just be easier for you this way right now. It's not that I'm not accepting you, right? But it'll just be easier for you to navigate this way, not realizing that that's also, traumatic and harmful as well. But yes, all of those things do, of course, exist. Even more, even more for queer, Black, and brown people.
Yeah.
From what we've learned in our past about going to doctors and seeking medication, and especially as we're looking at our trans brothers and sisters, and wanting to go to a doctor that accepts the whole of them. But how many doctors and surgeons that look like us are willing to prescribe tea, right? To perform top surgery, right? To do these things that will make, this Black or brown person feel like that whole person.
Right. I just want to mention really quickly, and this goes back to, I want to connect what Shanea was saying to what Rachel was saying, right? So yes, to answer the question, simply yes.
Yeah.
However, but even so, for trans people, it is much more worse, right? Particularly if you're a trans identified person who's navigating the world and your visual appearance doesn't necessarily equate or parallel with your identity in which you are expressing, or which, how you identify. And also what Shanea, what you're getting to here, and I think what's sort of embedded in your question, Professor Renee, is class.
Yes.
Right? So even in queer communities, Black queer communities, class is a distinction. Class is a defining line, right? It is something that separates us, right? And this goes back to resources and access. If you have the money, you can find someone, you'll get that doctor who will do that surgery, because it's all about capitalism for them. And they'll do the surgeries. If that's what you want, I also make that very, very clear, if that is something that you desire, because we also need to make sure that is something that gets put out there. Not everyone desires a surgery to make them look visible or to have a visible appearance that we deem as acceptable. But right, it's class, right? So sometimes it boils down to the have and the have-nots, right? So if you are a queer Black person or a trans Black person who has access to money, who has access to, to financial gain, then there's the possibility that you can live a safer life. And if you don't have that, your life also, your safety sometimes is in question. Like my own experience, I live in Chicago. And people say to me, oh, you don't live here, you don't live there, where do you live? And I say, listen, I'm a queer Black man who's married. I cannot live my race forbids me to live in particular communities where it's predominantly white. And my sexuality, or, I cannot walk down the street holding the hand of my husband in some Black neighborhoods, right? So it boils down to class, economics, and so forth, and safety.
I also want to add in.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I cut you off?
No, please.
All right. I also want to add in, there was a comment, and I want to make sure to lift it up, about white supremacy, and all about trying to get as close to white supremacy as people can. And that makes people feel like they're a part of it, and they get to be like part of the white club or whatever, right? And so like we see a lot of people trying to get as close to whiteness as they possibly can. We see this with colorism. We see this with gender and sexuality. White supremacy demands that there be one mode. And so I remember growing up hearing like, we don't want to make your life any harder for you. Mm-hmm. We don't want things to be harder. And that's all about getting closer to the ideal that white supremacy is set up. And so when I hear this list, it's like, yeah, that's true for people of color across the board. But then it's so much harder because you're seen as further away from that white supremacist ideal when you add queerness into it. And then when you add transness into it, or even like transness, but refusing to do quote unquote passing. And then the further that you get, the harder that your life is. And it's all because of this white supremacist model that we have, white supremacist capitalist model that we have in our country.
That's it. That white supremacist capitalist model. Mm-hmm. One further question. In American Theater magazine, I read an article. It was in 2000. It was dated 2018. An artistic director from Chicago at that point, Megan Carney, said, I think of queerness as a way to disrupt, reimagine, and liberate our bodies and minds. We need to tell more stories that reveal the nuances of our identities and desires. We must remember that not all queer people benefited from the recently won policy battles, especially trans folk and queer people of color. With that said, I think everyone in our extended communities feels vulnerable and galvanized to act right now. My question for my panel is, what is your response to this? And what are some of the specific action steps that need to be taken right now to support the needs of LGBTQ plus individuals? And this time I will start with the person who has been the quietest, and that's Miss Robinson.
Oh, okay.
I'll start with her.
Well, go ahead, Billicia.
Yeah, Billicia, go ahead.
She
And
looked
while,
like she had
she's
a.
getting herself
She was ready.
together. Yeah, she was ready.
Well, I think one thing that just repeats in my mind is that homosexuality was considered a mental illness until 1973 by the National Psychiatry Association. So I wasn't born in 1973. I was born in 1979, but that's like, to me, close to my mind. I'm thinking my parents were, my dad was in grad school then. And so like, that is like, our parents were living in a time where you were considered, cray basically, in their mind, if you were homosexual. And that's just saying that just homosexual, not a trans person. So on top of that, like if someone is trans, that's something that they really don't know. And that is just everybody. Now you go into the Black community, and then, the Black community didn't hear about this change into this Psychiatry Association, because still now it's still hard for Black communities to talk to their families about just going to therapy just in general with all the hit and mess that we got going on, and so then you have that going on too, and then and then you have someone in your family who is trans. They really don't know, and then they really look at you as this person who's crazy, off, or something's wrong with you. What's wrong with how God made you and stuff like that, and putting and throwing the Bible at you. And so it's this very because I've seen people who are not really that religious, but for some reason when you say trans or anything within LGBTQ plus, all of a sudden the Bible starts appearing out for some reason. And so people start using these warped reasons and these and using Christianity and using really even other religions to be able to back up their ideology. And so so like really talking about queerness and really having it performed and having our voice, we need to be able to speak up, because so then we can be louder than all this other stupidity that's going on out there. Yeah. We need to be able to support it, because these people are dying. People are young queer people are killing themselves or committing suicide because they don't want to have to deal with it in their family. They feel alone and they can't talk about it. And if their family don't want to take them to therapy and they don't believe in that, then their only result is to commit suicide. So we need to be able to be out there so they can see that they have a place to go to. For our younger brothers and sisters, or brothers and sisters in non-binary community, we need to be out there so then they can feel like they have a place to go home to. Because everybody, no matter if it's the place that you grew up in, everybody needs that home. And that's what we're trying to do with LGBTQ plus theater, is giving everybody a home.
I love that. I want to read a comment, and then Lorraine, I'll be ready for your comment. This is from an associate of mine, actually, Reverend Dr. Raymond Anderson. He says, sadly, pseudo-Christianity is huge in the Black community, indoctrinated to hate and fear based on a false narrative. Most definitely. But that pseudo-Christianity in the Black community, that's another roundtable discussion. We'll get to that one next time. So go ahead, Lorraine. We're looking for action steps here. What should we be doing? What should be done?
Well, I'm thinking back again to kind of the earlier question of, sort of what's happening in the theater at large right now, and the discussions that are taking place. Again, during this time of pause and pandemic, just sort of a reckoning of the lack of opening for all sorts of artists of color throughout all parts of the theater institution. And this is, our theaters are supposed to be you know, these bastions of liberalness, and yet they are one color, and they are not inclusive, and they are not safe spaces, and they are not sharing of the resources. And so there are many detailed action steps that are out there and have been put out there, and despite years of workshops and quests for diversity and grants and all sorts of things that are supposed to be spurring you know, this quest along, it is a strange moment of reckoning of, you know, but where are the results? Where's the, you know, and it's not there. We're at the same place that we started at. And this is across all levels of organizations, and so it's a real moment of examination, and also of just, you know, it's, you know, the emperor with no clothes on. You know, there's no result.
Yeah, Shanea,
I think. Oh,
No, go for it, Billicia. Yeah, no.
I think one thing is policy needs to change. One of the big things, policy, and like for like all, you know, all of us are educators within like universities, for instance, with our curriculum, it's so white. And it's so like when you learn theater history, you learn all the white people. Shakespeare, oh yeah, Shakespeare is, you know, the man, and that's it. And then white people, and then something black, minstrelsy, and that's it. You know, and so everything is just one note. We have to deconstruct this curriculum. We have to tear it to pieces. I can say, like within my department, I've been talking to my colleagues and saying we need to cut this curriculum to shreds. And I'm tired of my kids of color, my LGBTQ+ kids coming up saying that nothing is said about them. Even gay professors are teaching all heterosexual, white heterosexual theater, and it's because we have been taught and bred that is the right thing, and we got to like. I got to, like, a lot of times I got to remind myself, no, I need to, like, this is not the way. Black theater is not just this way how I was taught. I need to, like, change things up and see what's really going on. And it's always changing. And so
there's also, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
But to chime on, and I'm sure there's also pressure that they feel like that they have to.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Yep, but like it needs to be made a requirement in every, and especially in the arts, that you have to have there should be requirements of studying different types of theater history that's inclusive of everybody. So then then you are in a class that's learning about everything. If you're not just in a Black theater class, if you're in a Black theater class, you're in there learning about LGBTQ theater. If you're in a Latinx class, or a Latina class, you're in there learning about everything too. Everything needs to be inclusive of all people, and not just one type of people. And so that the policy is the curriculum within education. It's in the system, and changing that system to make requirements. So then people unconsciously, they feel like even at my school, a lot of the Black kids feel like Black plays, if they're in a Black play, is not as good as the white play because of the psychology of it, because requirements are everything that's Black is not a requirement. So you think that's not important. So it has to be required, a policy, and then that can start shaping it, and so we can actually be in there making a difference, and these kids can have a real diverse, inclusive education. And not just to say these words. People throw diversity out like saying that as if they did something. No, actually do it.
And that's, and that's part of like, going with what Lorraine said as well, in regard to a lot of these theaters doing our shows for the grant, right? For the workshop, right? And that just being enough, and that being it, instead of continuing the conversation, it's almost as if I check that box. Right. Instead, embracing some of the, the newer playwrights like Danja R. Love, right, who's going back and looking at queerness throughout history, right, and then hopefully integrating that into the curriculum, because a lot of these young Black queer students in arts programs know that they will be on stage. The play that you'll be in. It's a Black play. I'll be in that.
I'll be in that, right.
right? Instead of looking at devising, instead of looking at where do we fit in these other, in the rest of the canon.
Right. Right. Right.
Well, I would like to throw out, congratulations and shine a light on our playwright, Rachel Lynett, because I think she is doing amazing things. I know when you were mentioning Billicia about, we have these theaters that are named after, soul white playwrights, just an example, Shakespeare Theater. How many Shakespeare theaters are there? I would like to say how inspired I am by Rachel Lynett and the fact that she has created the Rachel Lynett Theater Company. And let us have X number more of those. Please bring the theaters on. So that's what we need. We need Rachel Lynett and so many more like her. So
Rachel, please tell us, share that, the Rachel Lynett Theater Company. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, we are on a little hiatus right now because I just recently moved. But so the Rachel Lynett Theater Company, we just I don't even know the word, I'm so tired. We just were founded in June 2020. So I'll be super brief about it because I've got like a very long rant. But I was living in Madison, Wisconsin at the time, on State Street, where a lot of the riots were happening. They were happening everywhere in the country. And so what happened was a really just brief thing of what happened is that because of where I lived, and because I didn't have air conditioning, I had to keep my windows open, and the police had tear gassed the street so much that my apartment filled with tear gas. And when I tried to go outside to get air, an officer pointed a gun at me and told me to go back inside. And so after living through that, and then just 3 days of not sleeping, and then seeing these really hollow and empty, we support Black lives statements that people were putting out, that theater companies where I experienced both micro and macro aggressions, they're really kind of the same thing. I got really frustrated and said I wanted to start my own theater company. And so I did. And we had 6 shows last year because we were crazy. And we just said, well, let's do it. And we said we'd pay everybody that came through the door. The priority was women of color, queer people. And we did my plays only because I didn't have to pay myself royalties, but we paid everybody else. Mm-hmm. And it was all about centering people of color, specifically queer people of color, and making them center stage on stories that aren't trauma focused.
Okay.
And one thing I did want to say really quickly is that what I did at my department, I got really tired of this whole like Shakespeare is precious. So I decided to rewrite Shakespeare's comedies and teach it that way. And so I was like, oh, okay, we have to teach Shakespeare. Great. Let's read Lear by Young Jean Lee instead. If we have to do it this way, then why are we still not being creative about the ways that we do it? And I think that I really want to echo that it has to start with us. It has to start with the educators pushing back and saying what we've been doing is not enough.
Yes. Rachel, I have a comment in the comments in the chat. Someone said, Rachel made her own table. And you definitely did, my sister. You definitely did. Congratulations. That is just wonderful. Yes, it is. We're going to switch gears just a little bit. And this question is for Lorraine. Theater recreates life on stage, which according to HowlRound.com is a pressure cooker for interpersonal drama because it places the audience outside of the play in the role of investigative watchers. This play, what are some of the larger societal issues that this play brings up?
It brings up a lot of things, but I think that the piece, it speaks to the heart, and 2 characters are coming together during a challenging time. They've lost a partner in common, and we get to see them connect through that experience, and also still experience hope and joy through connecting with someone else. I think that when we lose a loved one, we're seeking to get pieces of them back however we can, and that is real, and so someone else can sort of restore some of that lost loved one to them, those stories, those memories, things that they've experienced that they find are in common. But we that we can connect is still at that time is amazing. And Rachel has written this piece as a dark comedy. So there is life in that. And my role as director is really to get out of the way and to let these characters speak and come to the forefront. We just need some more Rachel Lynett plays.
Yes, we do. We definitely do. So, and this is a question for the entire panel. Do we as theater practitioners have the obligation, dare I say, the political obligation, to engage and focus the audience's gaze? The audience's gaze, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that. If this is left unchallenged, audiences are allowed to remain passive both during and after the play. So is that our obligation, to focus the gaze of the audience? Anybody that wants to jump in?
I'll say yes.
Okay.
Again, speaking from the chair of a director and producer, and being part of a company like Transformation Theater, it is absolutely our role to bring a lens or spotlight to different stories, and that is part of the mission and objective of Transformation specifically, but that's the role of all theater. We just need more underrepresented voices to have a space to be heard and to be brought to light for all audiences, both our personal, our homegrown audiences and then audiences beyond.
Yeah. Anybody else want to piggyback on that? Do we have a responsibility to do that? Or should we just try, or should our goal just to be, let's put bottoms in seats? Because, we got that mortgage to pay, we got, all these bills to meet. What's our obligation?
Well, Nina Simone says it is what she said. It is our duty as artists to reflect the times. I'm paraphrasing it, but but it's our duty to reflect the times, and that's political. Like, her songs were political. Yeah. It was reflecting the time. Mississippi Goddamn, that was a real thing that was going on. Well, still going on now, and that's political. We have to reflect the times, reflect what's going on, and yes, we have to use that as a way for people to be able to open up discussions. And so it is uncomfortable. It makes people angry, and these emotions come out, and that's what we are. That's what we're meant to do as artists. So then people can see their lives, they can see other people's lives reflected on stage, and be able to have these conversations, these uncomfortable conversations, because they need to be said. Because if not, it becomes, if it's not talked about, all of a sudden it's going to be start to boil and become a riot, become something else, come something that's dangerous, instead of a place where we can start making true change.
Okay, definitely. And our art should be reflecting true change. Mm-hmm. What else? Dr. Long, I see the look on your face.
No, they all said it, right? And I agree with them. I would agree with everything they've said, right? But I think that sort of what's been said already is that theater has always been used as a place to focus the gaze, right? Historically and also within our contemporary moment, right? And thinking back to Billicia's comment referencing Nina Simone, right? That, theater artists and artists in general have always sort of, responded to the moment, responded to something that is relevant and necessary, or in other words, as I like to say, responded with a sense of urgency. Right. That being said, God, I had a comment and I just lost it. Oh, so regardless of the class that I teach, I always start off class this way, and I always tell students why I love theater. And I always say, I love theater because of the possibilities. Uh-huh. And by that, I mean, theater is a place where possibilities are endless. One of those possibilities is to illuminate marginalized, oppressed communities, identities, and histories, and to shed light on those, on those areas. And hopefully someone in that audience, and more than just one, right? But folks in the audience walk away with a different mindset, and that's the goal. And so I think about queer, writers or folks who are centering queer stories. I think about Lynett's work, right? Rachel Lynett's work. I think about Christina Anderson's work, right? I think about something, I'm gonna put you two together. I think about Lynett and Anderson's work, right? And both of these stories are not just tragic story. I mean, there's some tragic moments, but not just stories about the tragedies of being queer, trans, gender nonconforming, but it illuminates joy and joyful possibilities. And I think, and for me, that right there is quite transgressive, and that's radical. That not all of our stories have to be about sex and or about someone, being beaten, or the trodden experience of an LGBTQ identified person, but just showing you how they find joy in the midst of trauma and pain, which to me is a Black philosophy, in and of itself, right? And I think if we can, but here's the thing, as we see with Rachel and with the play You Are Mine, this isn't like, I keep bringing this up, this is not new, but it is our responsibility to go and search for those plays and those playwrights. I think about, again, another queer pioneering playwright in our contemporary moment is Charlene Holmes.
Yeah.
Right? And her plays, she's alive and still teaching. Right? Someone that we have access to. We don't have to wait till they're dead and then 200 years later, we find their work somewhere in somebody's archive, and then we try to figure out who they were. The works are there. But I think part of that then goes to, and this is a comment that Lorraine made earlier about, capitalism and institutions. I think to some degree, it'd be wonderful if all of these plays are produced, in regional theaters and, on main stages where folks can thrive and make money, but also recognize that there are community-oriented theater companies and there are underground radical theater companies that are producing these types of works. And so the question therefore gets turned to the audience, well, what do you want to see? It's there, you got to go find it and stop looking for mainstream commercial theaters to give you the works in which you are, looking for. Yeah.
Definitely. And Renee, I just wanted to chime in, and I think this relates to what you just said as well, Dr. Long. But Renee, you mentioned the question of, or do we need to defer to butts and seats? And theater is not a building. It's not a place. It's a ritual. It's an essential human expression. It's all the things that Dr. Long was just talking about. And it happens whether or not, we have these venerated places to do it, or, certain audiences only to come and see it. But it's something that we have within each of us and come together and share with others. It is not fixed or stuck. And it does not belong to just one person or place or group of people.
Right. I love that. It's not the building. It's not a building. Lorraine, what was your takeaway as the director of this piece? What was your takeaway?
Well, I will say, well, I'll say something more broad because, I don't want to say that, that this is just a universal story, because we've said that we don't want to hear that and qualify the play in that way. I will say, as a director and producer, I want to, I want to, and as an audience member, I want to experience the beauty and specificity of the unique characters and their relationships on stage, and to be transformed by that experience. And it is in that process that then, a play, story, someone's life can touch everyone, but it's in that specificity. And that's what is beautiful in stories like Rachel's.
Yes, and Rachel, I'll give you, because we're about to bring everything to a close. This has been such a wonderful discussion. Rachel, I'll give you the final word. Is there anything that hasn't already been said that you would like to leave us with? And first, I want to just hold you up, sister. I just want to hold you up. Your own theater company, named Rachel Lynett Theater, can't mistake it. And this piece of work, this wonderful piece of work. I was laying in my bed reading and giggling and laughing at it. And at the end, I went, really? And I threw the book all over. I threw it everywhere. My daughter thought something was wrong, but because I was like, really? Are y'all serious? But I digress. So I just want to lift you up, sister. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I am equity minded, so I want to make sure to not take the fully last word and to offer that to everyone, because I think we all contributed a lot to this conversation, and it was really important that if there's anything anyone would like to say, I would like to go ahead and create the space for that. Just because I realize the play may have brought us here, but we all are going to walk away with something that we probably didn't expect, and that's really special to me. And all that I'll say is thank you all so much. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and it's been fun to see what I agree on and what I don't agree on. And I wish this could be a semester's worth, I think.
Yes, it could. Dr. Long, any parting words?
Yeah, listen, check out the play, check out Rachel's play. And in addition to checking out Rachel's play, check out Black theater, check out queer theater, check out queer Black theater, check out, works that center trans community. Check out the work of my friend, oh gosh, I am messing up on the name. Anyway, check out the theater, right? It exists. Go see it. Support it.
Thank you.
Support it with funding. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Go see it, but support it with funding, especially now, especially at a time like now.
I'll say something. I just want to say, yes, go see Rachel Lynett's play next month. Go support her theater company, and then and also support Black queer theater as a whole. Black theater, Black queer theater, queer people of color. Support that, and even if you are not queer or Black and queer, whatnot, we need your support, and it's not about just money. It's about you being there and being not only a listening ear, but standing up when someone is saying something that is wrong or hateful or violent, and being a part of the truth instead of the lie. So we need everybody within this circle. So and thank everybody. Thank you all for coming.
I love that. Being a part of the truth. I love that, and not a lie.
I want to say, of course, in piggybacking on the supporting Black queer theater, support our Black, queer, and brown youth, because they are our voices of tomorrow. History has its eye on them, right? And so we need to support and encourage and advocate for them. But Rachel, I just really want to say that, I loved this play. I wasn't sure what I was stepping into, but I love this play. I think everybody should go and see it. But one of the things that stands out to me the most about it is I love that it could be any man's story. It could be every man's story, but I love the specificity. And I don't want to ignore the fact of who these characters are, right? The queer woman, right? The trans man, and then who Jax is, right? And I think that that's important, because so often we're like, oh, that could be anybody's story. No, it's not. It's their story.
It's their story.
Right.
And I think that that's really important. And I love that you clung through that throughout the play.
Right.
Yeah, it's their story, and that's the bottom line. It's their story.
And can I just say that I loved reading from a queer Black playwright, that I loved reading there throughout the play.
Yes.
That's new.
In a sense, I love the fact that you normalized it, right?
Yes.
And so there was not this moment of explanation needed because you had a character who was unaware or ignorant, right? But it was sort of, and this goes back to the idea of possibilities, right? Through the queer lens or queer framework in which you're writing. Normalize it by putting it out there, and that's what you've done. I love that part, Shanea. I'm with you on that one.
Definitely. Well, Lorraine, I gotta have your last word.
I will just say, please come see the reading. You Were Mine by Rachel Lynett, Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. See you then.
See you then. Ladies, gentle persons, this concludes our discussion. Thank you for joining us, and please be sure to visit our website or find us on Facebook and join us for our next virtual reading of You Were Mine by Rachel Lynett on Tuesday, March 9th, 2021 at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a good evening, be well, and support the arts. Good night.